My name is Holly. I'm standing outside the house I grew up in, the chill of the night seeping through my coat. Just moments ago, I walked out, leaving behind a room filled with shock, anger, and the shattered pieces of my family's web of lies. The federal judge, a man I once met in a courtroom, stood at the end of my mother's dining table, his eyes fixed on me as he asked, "Who are you to them, exactly?" The question hung in the air like a heavy fog, and I knew that my answer would either keep the illusion intact or bring the whole charade crashing down. In that moment, I thought back to all the times I'd been pushed to the sidelines, all the times my achievements were overshadowed by my brother's fabricated success. I grew up in a small town, where my family's image was everything. My parents, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, were all about appearances. My father, a quiet man, always seemed to retreat into his newspaper whenever there was conflict, while my mother, a force to be reckoned with, was obsessed with presenting a perfect family to the world. My younger brother, Jake, is 2 years younger than me. He's a charming guy, with a ready smile and an easy way with people. He works at a car dealership in town, selling used cars. It's honest work, but my mother has always inflated his position. In her stories, he's a high-flying executive on the verge of a big promotion, managing a large team and closing multi-million-dollar deals. I, on the other hand, have always been different. I fell in love with journalism in college. I was the one staying up late in the newsroom, chasing stories that others overlooked. After graduation, I landed a job at a big city newspaper, the Metro Tribune. I've written some important pieces, including a series on police corruption that got national attention. But my mother has never been proud of my career. She sees it as something that might embarrass the family. She'd rather tell people that I work in a simple office job, doing administrative tasks. I remember when I was 8 years old. There was a mantel in our living room with 6 framed photos. 5 were of Jake at different ages, in various activities like Little League, school plays, and birthday parties. My photo was tucked away behind a vase and a fake plant. I tried to move it to the center, but the next day, it was back in its old place. That was the first time I realized that I was the invisible child in my family. As I got older, I kept trying to prove myself. When Jake made the basketball team, I told myself that if I got straight A's, my mother would finally see me. But when I graduated second in my class, she skipped my graduation to watch Jake sit on the bench at a regional playoff game. In college, I thrived. I loved the excitement of uncovering the truth, of shining a light on the dark corners of society. I worked hard to get my first big story at the Metro Tribune. It was about a slum landlord who was endangering the lives of his tenants. The story led to inspections and fines, and my editor gave me a grudging compliment. I was so excited to tell my mother. I called her that night, but she cut me off before I could finish. She asked me if I'd heard how many points Jake had scored in his latest game. Over the years, I kept trying to break through my mother's wall of indifference. Every promotion, every award, I hoped would make her see me. But instead, she told the neighbors that I'd dropped out of college and was working a menial job to get by. Last year, I was assigned to cover a series of police shootings in a nearby city. I spent months buried in evidence, interviewing witnesses, and sitting through a long civil trial. The federal judge on that case was the same man who would later be at my mother's dinner table. He noticed me during the trial. He saw me taking notes, waiting in the hallways, and he complimented my work after the verdict. He said, "Ms. Thompson, your series was some of the most thorough reporting I've seen on this issue. It takes courage to hold a system like that to the light." I was so proud, but I didn't tell my mother. I knew she wouldn't care. Then, one Tuesday night, or rather Wednesday morning at 1:30, my phone rang. It was my father. He said, "Jake and his fiancée, Lily, are having her parents over for dinner on Friday. Your mother says you can come, but keep your mouth shut." My mother's sharp voice came through the background. Her father is a federal judge. "Don't embarrass us like you always do." I was angry, but I agreed. I thought I could endure one night of pretending to be someone I'm not. On Friday, I left work a little early. I put on a nice suit, the one I'd worn when I received a national award for my police shooting series. It was like a suit of armor, a reminder of who I really am. The drive to my parents' house was long and quiet. I thought about all the times I'd been made to feel small, all the lies my mother had told. When I arrived, my mother opened the door. She looked me up and down, making sure I fit the image she wanted to present. "Come in. We need to go over a few things," she said. She showed me where I'd be sitting, at the far end of the table, away from the center. I asked her if she was really going to introduce me as an office worker. She said, "Holly, you're so dramatic. No one cares what you do. Jake is the one building a family here." Lily arrived first. She was warm and friendly. She asked me what I did in the city. Before I could answer, my mother appeared at my side and said, "Holly just does some administrative work downtown. Nothing exciting." Then, the judge and his wife arrived. The judge was tall and imposing, with a sharp gaze. My mother introduced Jake as a high-level executive, and then she introduced me as an unassuming office worker. The judge took my hand, and his eyes locked onto mine. I saw a flicker of recognition. Dinner started, and my mother took control. She talked non-stop about Jake's supposed achievements, while my father sat quietly at the end of the table. Every time I tried to say something, my mother would interrupt me and send me on some errand. The judge and his wife noticed. Lily also seemed to sense that something was off. When Lily asked me about my life in the city, my mother quickly changed the subject. Then, the judge lifted his glass and tapped it with his knife. He stood up and started to talk about family and honesty. He spoke to Lily and Jake, and then he walked around the table. When he reached me, he stopped and said, "I have to say, I am surprised to see you here." My mother tried to jump in, but the judge ignored her. He looked at me and asked, "Who are you to them, exactly?" For a moment, I thought about lying, about keeping the peace. But then I remembered all the times I'd been silenced, all the times my mother had tried to erase me. I took a deep breath and said, "I am their daughter and Jake's sister. And I am an investigative reporter for the Metro Tribune." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's face turned pale. The judge then said, "Ms. Thompson, your series on the police shootings was some of the most important journalism I've seen in my courtroom. Your reporting was cited in 3 briefs in my case." Lily looked at Jake, shocked. She asked him why he'd never told her the truth. Jake mumbled something about not wanting drama. The judge then turned to Jake and asked about his real position at the dealership. Jake finally admitted that he was just a senior sales associate. Lily was furious. She said, "If you stood by while your mother erased your sister and lied to my parents, I need to understand what that says about you." She stood up and said she needed some air. My mother started to cry, saying she'd only wanted to present the family in the best light. My father finally spoke up and said, "You went too far." The judge gave me his card and said, "If you ever want a reference for a panel or a fellowship, Ms. Thompson, you have my number." Lily called off the engagement. She said she couldn't marry into a family with so many lies. My mother wailed, blaming me for ruining Jake's future. I stood up and said, "I didn't want the spotlight. I just wanted to be myself at my own family's table." And with that, I picked up my coat and walked out of the house. The drive back to the city was filled with a strange kind of quiet. It was the quiet after a storm, when the air is clear but the damage is done. When I got home, I found a bunch of messages on my phone. My mother was angry, blaming me for everything. Jake was also upset, saying I'd made a big deal out of nothing. But there was also a message from Lily. She said she was sorry and wanted to meet for coffee to hear my side of the story. 2 weeks later, we met at a cafe near my office. She told me that my mother had implied I was unstable and not close to the family. I told her that's how bad behavior gets passed down in families. A month later, Jake called me. He said he was starting therapy. He apologized for not standing up for me and for going along with our mother's lies. My mother went silent for a while. Then, she sent me a text saying she missed me. I replied that I'd only come back on my own terms, as a reporter, not as the pretend office worker. A few months later, she called me. She said she was sorry for lying about me and for asking me to hide my true self. It wasn't a grand apology, but it was a start. I drove back to my parents' house a few weeks after that. When I walked in, the first thing I noticed was the mantle. My childhood photo was now front and center, next to Jake's. It was a small sign, but it meant the world to me. That night, over dinner, my mother asked me how I turned an idea into a front-page story. She listened without interrupting, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like she was really seeing me. Looking back, I realized that love should never come at the cost of losing yourself. I'm done being the invisible daughter. I'm ready to be myself, and I hope my family is ready to accept me for who I am.